Cool.
Hi and welcome everyone. I'm just watching the participant numbers go up, but we already have 54 attendees. So Adonis, I see you. Ashley, hi. Chloe, Eden, Dominique, Hazel, Caleb, Kanoa, Moises. Thanks for all being here. Unsel, I'm sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. Yashvi, Sylvia, Sebastian. Oh, we have a few Sebastians. Hi. Sakai. Danny, David, Dennis. Everyone, welcome. We'll get started in about a minute or so.
Good afternoon and welcome to Multicultural Open House Admissions and Financial Aid and Closing Ceremony. Please note that you can use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen to communicate technical issues at any time, and one of my colleagues will assist. Please also use the Q&A feature throughout the presentation to ask a question that will get raised at the end of the session. If we did not get to your question, we will follow up after the meeting. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be shared after the meeting on the website. At this time, please allow me to introduce Associate Director of Undergraduate Admissions, Maura Poe. Thank you.
Hi and welcome everyone. I'm thrilled that so many of you have joined us for the closing ceremony. This has been the most fun, the Financial Aid and Admissions Overview. I am joined this afternoon by our incredible Director of Undergraduate Financial Aid, Scott Wallace-Judas. And just so you know what we're going to be doing this afternoon, we're going to cover a couple of things, like what's left to cover. Well, let's do a financial aid overview. Then we'll also have some admissions information. We'll also have time for questions. So you should see the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen right now. So hold off on your Q&A just for now, similar to previous sessions. And I am joined by 4 incredible colleagues in the background. I'm joined by Jill, Marisa, Denasia, and Catherine, who will help answer questions at the appropriate time. So we'll let you know when that is. And then we'll wrap up. But before we go into the financial aid overview to kick this off, I want to make sure that we do a land acknowledgement, and you should all be able to see right now on top of this picture of New Haven, the land acknowledgement. I think it's so important. We did this during the Mo kickoff, but to also do it at the end to acknowledge the nations who lived on this land well before it was colonized. And you can see from the Mohegan to the Pequot to the East Pequot to the Quinnipiac and many Algonquin speaking people. So take a moment to take a look at this statement and read over it. And if you live in the United States, I encourage you to do the same thing, to look a little into who lives and who lived on your land before it was colonized. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Scott Wallace-Judas, who will lead us through a financial aid overview. But thank you so much for being here. See you in a bit. Thanks, Scott. That looks great.
Great. Hello, everyone, and I'm so incredibly thankful and pleased that you are joining us today for a few minutes to talk about admissions and financial aid. And I know that you've had a lot of great experiences throughout the Multicultural Open House, and I'm just super pleased that we're able to wrap this up, and our closing ceremony is about admissions and financial aid. And, today we'll be talking, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. But one of the things that I am so pleased and so proud of, I've been here at Yale now for just over 3 years. So I guess I'm a senior if you want to put it in those regards. And, you know, in terms of the financial aid aspect of our program here at Yale, I'm just so pleased that we are able to support our students financially and their families in such a way that most institutions in this country are not able to do so. So I do want to just start briefly with a statement about myself. My name is Scott Wallace Judas, and I am the Director of Undergraduate Financial Aid here at Yale. Like I said, I've been here just wrapped up my 3rd year, and I am a first-generation college student from rural Western Nebraska. So to give you some idea what rural Western Nebraska is like, I grew up in a town of about 300 and 350 people out towards the Wyoming and Colorado border. And so, you know, as I was thinking about schools, traveling, you know, far from home and to a larger place, you know, really was something that I had to think a lot about. And then when you tack finances on top of that, it was also very concerning for me. So this is something that I really enjoy doing, working with all of you and with your families. And so, you know, to start with today, I want to talk a little bit about access and affordability, because this is not something that has just come about at Yale in the last couple of years or so. I mean, I think one of the things that's most amazing to me is that in 1966, Yale was one of the first institutions in this country to adopt and commit to both a need-blind admission policy, as well as a policy that states that we're going to meet your full demonstrated financial need. And so a little bit about what that means. Need-blind is an admission policy, as is stated here, and that means that your admission decision is going to be based off of all of the other factors in your admissions application. A record of your transcript, your academic endeavors and achievements, those other categories that you bring to your application, the events that you've been involved with, the clubs that you have started, the things that you're passionate about, and that Maura will speak about a little bit later. And so your financial aid application is completely separate in terms of we will evaluate your family's ability to contribute to your college education based off of your family's finances, and not based off of comparing you with one student or another in terms of merit-based scholarship. And so, you know, Yale from 1966 on has looked at these as 2 separate processes: your admission ability and your financial aid and your family's ability to pay for college. And so we are one of the few institutions in the country that has extended this both to our domestic applicants and our international applicants as well. And so both of those policies still apply, regardless of your citizenship status. And I think it's just really important to note that access and equity are really the pillars of our financial aid programs here. So as we're thinking about our financial aid policies, as we're thinking about our procedures, what we always want to think about and what we put first is, you know, how are we going to fairly and equitably distribute these funds? And how are we going to take into account a family's financial situation specifically? So there's a couple of things that usually come up in sessions like this, and I'm sorry we're not on campus and in Battelle or one of the other great spaces on campus, but I'm really pleased that we're able to have this conversation with you today. And one of the first things that always comes up is, that's great, you talk about access, you talk about equity, but what are the factors that go into determining need-based financial aid? You know, as I said earlier, Yale does not offer merit-based scholarships, which would be based off of, you know, your athletic ability or your academic achievements, your musical abilities. Our financial aid is solely based off of your family's need. And so on this screen, you'll see some of the factors that go into a need-based financial aid. And there are literally hundreds of data points. So this doesn't cover everything, but it does give us a good sense of, when you start to review my financial aid application, what are some of the things that you're starting to look at? The easiest way for me to describe this is we are going to be looking at both parent and student, and we're going to look at both income and assets. So you can kind of get in a little cadence with that, but it's parent and student, income and assets. Now, one of the most important factors in determining need-based financial aid, and one of the family's ability to pay for college, is parent income. So parent income is the first thing that we start with. And for those of you who are parents or guardians on the line, or for those of you who are students and understand your family finances, we're not talking about the adjusted gross income that you will see on your family's taxes. So when a student comes to me or a parent comes to me and says, it's great, you know, my taxable income or my adjusted gross income based off of my tax returns is X. That's not the exact same number that we're going to use in financial aid. So we will look at both taxable and untaxed income that a family has. We do require your tax return information, but we'll also add those income data points that are not necessarily associated with taxes. In looking at assets, what we do is we will start with our cash assets. So those might be your savings or your checking account, other investments. It's important to note here, however, that we're not talking about retirement assets. So if parents, if you have retirement set aside, or students, if your parents have retirement that are set aside in accounts that are designated retirement accounts, a 401k, a 403b, a pension plan, the value of those plans is not included as an asset, but the amount that your family voluntarily contributes each year is actually included in the amount of income that a family has. So for assets, again, we start with those cash assets. We also add non-cash assets. So think about home equity, other real estate, business value, things that add value to your family's net worth, but maybe aren't as liquid as the cash assets that your family has. So again, we will do this for both parent and student. So we will look at income, we will add up your total income, we will add up the total assets that a family has. From those two numbers, we will then start to subtract out certain elements in a family situation. One of the biggest questions that I hear in terms of need-based financial aid is, but I don't have that amount left at the end of the month. So remember that financial aid is not going to be a cash flow analysis, okay? It is actually going to say, here's your income and assets as we've calculated them, and then we're going to apply allowances based off of the household size. So a household of 8 or 9 is going to take more money to run than a household of 3 or 4 or 2. We'll also look at the number of siblings in college. Okay, so if you and your family are supporting 2 or 3 or maybe even more students in college, that number in college means that there is less money for each one of those students. So there are a number of factors like that. We look at cost of living regions in the United States. One of my favorite examples to use, being from the Midwest, is Manhattan. So if you would have talked to me about Manhattan for a long time, I would have assumed you were talking about Manhattan, Kansas. But Manhattan, Kansas has a very different cost of living than Manhattan, New York, which is probably what most people think of when they think of Manhattan, right? So we do take a look at the difference in living and the cost of living across the country. How old parents are they closer to retirement, and should they be saving more of their income and assets for retirement? Are there other children that are in private or secondary schools that they should be saving for? So there are a number of different factors, as I mentioned, that go into determining need-based aid. There's a question that I see that was added in the chat that I'd like to be able to answer as well, and that is in terms of overseas assets. And when we are talking about income or assets, and this is a really good point, and a number of our families have this situation, we are looking at income that is both earned here in the United States and overseas. And for assets, we're looking at assets, whether they be cash, cash assets or non-cash assets. We'll be looking at those regardless of whether they are here in the US or whether or not they are overseas. So, it doesn't really matter where the assets are, it matters that they are part of your family portfolio. So there was another question that came in from Angelica talking about asking whether or not, if one of your parents is in college, does that count in the siblings in college? Is it the same as a sibling? And the short answer to that is no. A parent in college is not the same as a sibling in college. And there are a number of reasons for that. But what I would recommend to you, Angelica, or others that have this situation, is that if you have a parent who is in college, that you submit some supplemental or additional information with your financial aid application that lets us know that your parent is in college. Here is the amount that they are spending each year, and here's sort of the reason why that they are in school. So I'll give you a little bit of background on that. Several years ago, the federal government made a move, and most colleges followed suit, that parents in college don't count, because most of the time what they found is parents were just going down to a local community college, felt like they could take a course or two, pay a fairly low tuition rate, and get a number in college split. So it's just like a full sibling that you may be paying full price for. So parents in college were taken out. However, at Yale, we do recognize that there are many valid reasons that parents may be in school. So if you tell us a little bit about why, there's job retraining, or they're working to make themselves updatable and more marketable in the job search, oftentimes we can consider those expenses as well. So the short answer is no, but the slightly longer answer is let us know and provide that as some of the additional detail. And we would definitely, our financial aid committee would take that into account. Sorry for this, the screen flip there. So that's a little bit about need-based financial aid. We'll come back to this in a few minutes as well. But I want to talk about ways that you can get an estimate of the cost to attend Yale. And this first one, the net price calculator, is something actually that you can do at any college or university. It's a mandate from the US Department of Education. You would be able to go out to any college website, including Yale's, and you can search for net price calculator. And it has to be called exactly net price calculator. And it will give you what the net cost of attending a school is. Now, net cost is a financial aid jargon for when we take the total cost, tuition, fees, room and board. We'll look at books and personal expenses, travel costs. We take that overall cost to attend school for 1 year, and we subtract out the amount of grant or scholarship. In other words, the free money that you are receiving, either from the federal government or the state or institutional sources. So when you take your cost and you subtract out the free money, what is that actual net cost or net price as it is referred to? So remember that it's just an estimate. It's as good as the information that you're submitting, and you still have to go through the financial aid application process. But for some of you out there who are looking just to get a range of costs, so our direct costs are somewhere $75,000 or greater, and you want to say, okay, I can't do 75, Yale is absolutely out. But what if you knew that the cost might be 10 to 15 or 17,000, or maybe it would be 35 to 45,000 for a family with your financial profile? That might get you enough to be able to apply and actually go through the process and see where we end up. So you know it's not the sticker price, and you have sort of a range. And that's where this quick college cost estimator comes into play. It doesn't really roll off the tongue, so I'll say that again, but quick college cost estimator. And at Yale, we use one called My Intuition, and there's about 6 or 7 questions that you answer. It takes 3 minutes or less to complete it. You can use round numbers. You can play with it to see, okay, if next year when my sibling is in college as well, what would my cost be? What happens when my older sibling graduates from college? What kind of effect and impact would that have on my financial aid? So there are a couple of ways that you can get estimates for your time at Yale. Okay, I do see a question out there, and this is a really great one that I do need to mention, and it asks if there are any alternatives to the net price calculator for international students. And at Yale, the net price calculator is going to be solely focused on US citizens or students living in the US. So if you're an international student, you're living in the US, you have US tax forms, the calculator and the estimator may work well for you. In terms of, for most international students, I would say the calculators aren't going to provide a precise answer. You could contact our office and we might be able to help you with some more details. But I would also say that, for instance, if you're a Canadian citizen and your system is pretty close to that of the United States, you could probably get away with looking at the My Intuition, the quick college cost estimator. but for most international students, there's not a calculator at this time, just because of the variances in international financing. So I do want to spend a little bit of time in our last few minutes to talk about the application process, because I think this is critical, that students feel, we're need blind, we're not going to take a look at the finances. So when do I have to apply for financial aid? What forms do I have to apply? And maybe I should just wait until after I've been admitted. And I would say to you, this is my own personal advice, is I would say, file your financial aid forms according to the financial aid deadlines, which is going to pretty much mirror that of the admission deadline as well. But that way, if you are admitted, we would be able to provide you with an estimate of your financial aid at the time of admission. Otherwise, if you get your stuff after you are admitted, our office will be working with a lot of students who are trying to figure out their finances, and it's just going to take us a little longer to get you your answer. So quickly talking about the requirements that you would have. This first one is the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. This is what helps our office determine your eligibility for federal financial aid purposes, as the name indicates. It's available now. It's available after October 1st of your senior year, and you should use the link here, fafsa.gov, to apply. There are lots of resources out there that may charge you to file the FAFSA, but as the name indicates, it's a free application for federal student aid. Our office can always help you file if you have questions about that as well. Just reach out to our office. And you would use 2019 tax information in order to file this. One thing that I would mention here is that if your family has experienced a change in income for some reason in 2020, maybe it was related to COVID-19, or perhaps it was a retirement or some other thing, file your forms with 2019 and then provide us additional information about 2020 and give us a little bit of detail, and our financial aid committee will work through that with you. The other application, and one that is more important to me in the work that we do in our office, is the Css Profile. So this is required by about 400 private colleges and universities in the United States. There is a small application fee for this, and it is also available now anytime after October 1st of your senior year. And I do mention the application fee because for some students, this can be a significant barrier. And if that is your situation, if you qualify for an SAT fee waiver, you'll automatically qualify through the College Board for the Css Profile application fee waiver. And if you don't qualify for one and you feel that it would be a financial burden on your family, contact our office, or you can look at our website and you'll find a waiver request form where we might be able to provide you a waiver in lieu of the automatic one through the College Board. And then the last item that I would highlight for you would be this idea of sending us your 2019 taxes and continue to review your portal once it becomes live, where you'll be able to look at, there may be some Yale specific forms that we are requiring as well. So I just want to put out there, we don't need to go into great detail about it, but there may be other forms that are required in your situation or items that we need to have clarified. So as I work to wrap this up, I'm pleased to virtually meet you today, and I hope that I have the chance to get to meet you when you're on campus, if you decide that applying for Yale is for you. Or, if you have questions through the process, please reach out to me, reach out to the office. We're more than happy to help. You can see some of the ways that you can contact us here, but we'll talk more about that at the end as well. And I think we'll save any more questions and answers. I will be answering some now, but we'll also, after Maura is done, we'll have some time for some live Q&A as well. So with that, I'm going to halt, I think right on time or maybe a minute after, and turn it over to Maura.
Thank you, Scott. So as Scott said, we will have time at the end to make sure that we can get to your questions. And I'm just making sure that I am turning off something so there's no echo. But now we're going to talk a little bit about admissions because yes, this has been the most fun, but how do I get accepted? A lot of you are on here wondering, how do I afford Yale? how can I get accepted? So I'm going to take some time to talk a little bit about our application policies, how we review our applications. Starting with, you should know what your application options are. We accept 3 different applications for first-year applicants. We accept the common application, which I believe over 500 colleges and universities around the country use at this point. We also use the application that's connected to the Coalition for Access, Affordability, and Success. We are also proud to be one of the over 40 QuestBridge partners, and in fact, in the incoming Yale class right now, we have over 100 QuestBridge scholars just in the first year class alone. Some were admitted through the QuestBridge match and some were admitted through regular decision. I want to make sure that you also know of our 2 deadlines because one of them is quickly approaching. Our regular decision deadline is January 2nd. Our early action deadline is November 1, but we are a single choice early action school, meaning if a student opts to apply to Yale early action, that's non-binding. They get an application to us on or before November 1 and they indicate early action, they get a decision from us in the middle of December. And if they're admitted, hooray! They still have until May 1 to tell us if they're going to come to Yale or not. It is a non-binding policy. But you should know that single choice early action means that a student, if they're applying to us EA, we're the only private school that they're using an early plan. So a student could absolutely apply to non-binding programs, early action programs at public schools. Part of the reason for that is because public schools, some of them have very strong merit-based scholarship opportunities tied into how early you apply. We do not have any merit-based scholarships. As Scott said, our financial aid is entirely need-based. So we don't want to disadvantage a student from getting one of those merit-based scholarships. So a student could apply to, say, Yale and the University of Illinois together, early action. A student couldn't apply to Yale and another private school together, early action. I recommend you only apply early if Yale is your top choice. And I say that because there's no advantage or disadvantage to doing early action versus regular decision. If another school is your top choice, go apply to them early. We'll be there in regular decision. We don't admit half of our class in the early pool or anything like that. We're not running out of financial aid money for you, so I don't want you to feel the pressure. I say only apply early if Yale's your top choice and you're ready to go with your application on or before November 1. If you need time to put together an application that you feel best represents who you are and showcases who you are, take that extra time. Again, there's no preference for early action versus regular decision. Now let's talk about what the actual required pieces of the application are. You have the application, and that comes with either the $80 application fee or a fee waiver. It is very easy to request a fee waiver on the common application or the coalition application. You essentially click or select on the drop-down menu that you would like to request a fee waiver. You can check off a reason why, and that's it, application fee waived. We do not want costs to be a hindrance to students applying to Yale. Recommendation letters. We require 2 academic core recommendation letters. So the core academic areas, math, science, social studies, English, foreign language, and computer science is in there as well. We require a counselor recommendation, and keep in mind, we understand that some schools have counseling loads where, yes, a counselor can write a long letter. They have 1 counselor per 20 students, but we also know that counseling loads they vary wildly across the country. And there are some states where the average student to counselor ratio is something like 700 to 1. So if a counselor can't write that personalized letter, we understand. You at least have those other 2 teacher recommendations coming in. We want the school report with a transcript. In the school report, it's a form that comes with, whether it's a common application, coalition application, or the QuestBridge application, that will give us some context of the school environment. And especially in this year, counselors are able to give information like, well, we actually ended up teaching remotely for the rest of the school year. We're still remote, or we're still hybrid. The counselor report will give us other important information. Standardized testing. Now, I listed this as a requirement because it continues to be a requirement for students who are applying for the class of 2022. So those are our juniors who are on the Zoom right now, sophomores and first years. And just like in any year, requirements may end up changing by the time you decide to apply. So make sure as you're getting closer to your senior year that you're double checking to see if any standardized testing requirements have changed. But for those seniors who are currently on this Zoom and thinking about applying as first year applicants next year, standardized testing is actually not required. We are neither requiring the SAT nor the ACT, especially in light of the fact that we are all living through a global health crisis. We understand that testing centers are closing left and right. Even if someone does end up going to test, they may not feel comfortable. So when I say that the SAT and ACT are optional, here's what I mean. If a student applying this year wants to share an SAT or ACT, they absolutely can, no problem. We will consider it. And you can self-report that. You've been able to self-report testing for a few years. If a student is not able to take an SAT or ACT, hey, no problem. We have a lot of other pieces of the application we can use to review, so we won't expect it. If a student is able to take an SAT or ACT, but they don't want us to know they're testing, that is fine. It is optional this year, and we have so much other information to use in our application review. So I cannot stress this enough. This is a personal decision if you're even able to take the SAT or ACT. You'll note that, again, it's still not listed there. The SAT subject test this year, it's not even a matter of them being optional. If you send them to us, we're not going to consider them. Finally, we require a mid-year report. So this is typically available from the school after the first semester is over, maybe after the first and second trimester are over. You'll want to double check with your school to ensure that they are sending this information to us. So let's actually talk about, I think I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment while I talk about how we use the different pieces of the application. I'm always very upfront with what the application review looks like and what the numbers look like. Not because an admit rate tells you about the quality of an institution or anything like that, but you should know before going into the application process what this looks like. In a traditional year, we want an entering class of about 1,550 first-year students. There's nothing traditional about this year. And in fact, our first year class is about 1,275 because we have about 300 students on gap years. That's okay. Next year's incoming class, we still plan on admitting a new 1,550 students, or admitting for a new 1,550. And then we're just bringing in the other 300. It's going to be like a mega first year class. But in a traditional year, about 1,550 first-year students. We offer admission to about 2,200 students in a traditional year. Why? Because we know not everyone, for some reason, not everyone will decide to come to Yale. And I say that jokingly. This application process, from the minute you decide to apply to the minute you decide where you're ultimately going to matriculate, this is a family decision, and it's about finding a great academic and social and financial fit. So you want to kind of meet that trifecta, academic, social, and financial fit. And there are going to be myriad schools that can fit into that category for you. So we offer admission to about 2,200 students. Last year, we had about 35,000 applicants. Actually, I think it was closer to 35,600 applicants. And what a lot of people lose sight of is the fact that the overwhelming majority of our applicants, they're doing well in their high schools. They're doing well on standardized testing. And again, standardized testing is even optional this year. That is not what's getting a student into Yale. That is not what's helping an admissions officer think about the critical questions in our application process. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't want a transcript or anything like that. We are an academic institution first and foremost. But the academic piece of the application review is almost like the preliminary part of the review. Do I have concerns about the student doing the work here on campus? Yes or no? No concerns? Great. Let's get into the meat, or the tofu as it might be, of the file. This also doesn't mean that if there's a semester that's off or a grade that's off, that we suddenly stop reviewing. But instead, it's a signal to an admissions reader, hey, I see this grade or I see this semester. Let me see if by the time I'm done reading this application, if I can say, you know what, I see this, but I don't have concerns with the student doing the work here on campus, and here are all the reasons why. But in addition, here are the reasons why we should offer admission to the student. There are 4 big questions we consider throughout our application process. 1, who is this student? So not surprisingly, by the time I'm done reading an application, I'd like to have a better sense of who this student is. 2, what kind of intellectual curiosity, intellectual spark am I seeing? Where is this love of learning? Like, what is the thing that keeps the student up late at night because they can't stop reading about the topic, or something that sends the student down the Wikipedia hole? You will never hear us ever talk about like, oh, here's what a typical Yaley is like. There's no typical Yaley or anything like that. Hi, Denasia, I see you, your camera's on. So if you want to turn off your camera, work from home. But we're thinking about that intellectual spark. And that's not so much about the valedictorian. That's not so much about, well, my GPA or my test score, but instead this love of learning. Like, that's something that you will hear of Yale's. They'll talk about the really neat things that they've learned in their courses. They talk about the interesting things their professors are doing. Professors talk about the interesting things that their students are doing. And there is just this love of learning. And we look for evidence of that in applications, this kind of intellectual spark. So who is this person? What's ticking up here? The 2 essential questions. What potential do we see for this student to make a significant positive impact in their classroom community? In the classrooms and the seminars and the residential colleges, around campus, around New Haven, but after they leave Yale. We want to see this potential for significant positive impact. And finally, what potential do we see for this student to take significant advantage of the resources that we have here? So maybe it's the student who their only dream is to work for the New York Times or the Washington Post. But yes, and they want to write. They're writers at heart, but they are working over and doing research at the medical school. Why? Why not? Or the student who is absolutely set on being an ABET accredited mechanical engineering major, but they're so excited that they can take Russian literature courses, take some jazz courses because they have this this love of the humanities that they want to explore. Or the student who goes abroad, and in a given graduating class, 2/3 of them will end up having at least one international experience. It may have nothing to do with their major. It may have nothing to do with the language they're studying, but maybe they were able to fulfill a distributional requirement. Why did they go abroad? Well, why not? The opportunities are there, and we want students who are going to take advantage of these vast resources. So again, the 4 big questions. Who is this student? What intellectual spark, what's ticking up here? What will they bring to our campus community, and what will they take from our campus community? The academic part of the application doesn't answer those questions, right? Or doesn't fully answer those questions, but the other parts of the application will, and I'll explain, maybe I'll even share the slide again with the different components of the application so you can kind of see how they tie in. I should mention that in our admissions office, we have admissions officers who review by territory, meaning they may review a state or a couple of states, or they review for countries or a couple of countries. And in our role as admissions officers, our main job is to be a liaison between a student in Yale and a high school in Yale, and if a student opts to apply, to present the applications, because context comes in. So if you're from the Prairie State, if you're from Illinois, hi, I'm your admissions officer. If you choose to apply, I will end up presenting the state of Illinois' applications to the admissions committee. I'm able to give school context, and we review students within the context of their school, thinking about, well, what kind of curriculum is available? What does a strong student look like from here? What curriculum choices did the student make? What actual grades are we seeing? Upward trends, downward trends? It's not just about, well, what's that GPA, that weighted GPA? Well, if it's a 4.0 scale, 5.0 scale, 11-point scale, 12-point scale, if you go to St. Anne's, you don't even have a grading scale. You end up submitting your written evaluations. But again, this is why it's never just going to be this test score, especially with testing being optional. This GPA means, boom, you're in, no, you're not. The other pieces of the application start coming together to start answering the essential questions. So the 2 core recommendations: what did the teachers say about you? What kind of impact was in the classroom? The recommendation letters that help a student to stand out go well beyond, the student did really well, they were a lovely student, they were wonderful, they had the highest grade in the class. I can see that from the transcript. But the letters that help a student to stand out are the ones where the teacher might say, you know what, he wasn't the loudest student in the class, but my goodness, every time he participated, every time he raised his hand, everyone else, whether it was on Zoom or whether it's in person, you could see everyone taking notes furiously. Why? Because we knew every time he would elevate this discussion to the next level. Or maybe the recommendation says, you know what? She easily had the highest grade in the class. She didn't need to lift a finger for that to happen. But you know what? She was the first one to help anyone who was struggling around her. She was the first one to bring external reading materials in to help make the material more accessible. She would bring math jokes in for us. She wanted to share her love of the subject with others and help others understand it like she did, so perhaps they could love it too. She made it a better learning environment for all of us. These are the kinds of recommendations that help us to start thinking, wow, I can see the impact that this student will have in the classroom community. With the counselor letter, I already said that sometimes we don't get a counselor letter, but if we do, the letters that help stand out are when the counselor can talk a little bit about your impact in the school community, maybe outside of the school. Maybe there are extenuating circumstances we need to know. Now, the application itself has a lot of information on it too. When we ask what you're doing outside of the classroom, sometimes people assume there's some kind of rubric or list of activities that we're looking for because that's what you should do to go to Yale. So one club and one publication and some service so they think I care about people. No, it's not that we're looking for a specific set of activities, but what we are looking for and what we're curious about is what's been meaningful enough for you to spend your precious time outside of the classroom? And perhaps where's there been some positive impact there? So maybe those are clubs or publications or religious organizations or sports. Maybe it's family responsibilities. You're helping out with younger siblings, picking them up after school or helping them with Zoom school now, right? Maybe it's a part-time job. Let us know, and you list that in the activities section. We're curious about where you've had some impact. We're curious about what's had meaning to you, okay? The essays, if you don't already know, be forewarned. We have a lot of writing for you. Part of it is, again, coming back to the idea that we're an academic institution first, right? So we want to see strong writing. But more than that, keep in mind that the essays and the written pieces are the only part of the application where you decide what we hear, right? You decide what we learn. The rest of the application, the recommendations are coming from elsewhere, the transcript, that's coming from your school. But in the essays, you decide what's important enough for me to share with Yale or with any college you're applying to, right? Oh, and that's another thing. You can learn a lot about a school's climate and a school's community and what they value based on what their supplemental questions are. So make sure you're really paying close attention to that. But it's not so much about, well, what does Yale want to hear? What do colleges want to hear? It's what do you want to share? And you know that you've shared effectively, that you're being your authentic self. And some of you may have heard this story before. Imagine you were to write your essay, type it up, print it up, drop it on the floor of your school without your name on it, back when we were all in person at school, right? If someone could pick up your essay and it didn't have your name on it, but read it and then say, oh, I know exactly who this person is, then you know you've done your job. You've shared yourself. A reader is able to meet you through those essays. Now, you don't see that, and I'm going to stop sharing again. You don't see that an interview is a requirement. There may be a potential for interviews. Interviews are absolutely optional, especially in this virtual world. And it may be an opportunity to meet over Zoom with a current senior. It might be with an alum in the area. If a student has an interview, it's another opportunity to learn more about Yale and to share more about yourself. But know that interviews are very limited and they are very optional. So I don't want you to think, well, I need to request an interview. No, if we need to get an interview, we will find ways to do that. But again, it is optional. But those other pieces of the application, the recommendations, essays, things like that, we have all of that. So once we get all of this information, we'll start reading. And as the leaves start turning orange and brown here in New England, all of us in our office are starting to get really excited because we know reading season's coming, because we start to get to know you. And what I will do is, as I'm seeing the Illinois applications, I start putting together a write-up of what I'm seeing, putting together all these pieces of the whole person, this whole person review. For the most competitive applicants, and there are a lot of most competitive applicants, I'll have another admissions officer do a second read, because let's see, do they see the strengths I saw? Do they have concerns I didn't? Do they see things I didn't see? So I get another opinion. And again, when I say the strongest applicants, it's all of these pieces coming together to answer, who is this person? What's ticking up here? What will they bring to our campus community? What will they take from our campus community? Eventually, we bring the applications to the admissions committee. It's not one person's decision. It's not two people deciding. There are a few of us in a room where we're able to, or in a Zoom, as I should say, because we are all remote, but we're able to share a screen just like I did with the PowerPoint, and we're able together to read essays, to look at what people list on their activities, to hear what the teachers said in their recommendations. Someone might say, hey, that second recommendation sounds really interesting. Let's read it together. And as an admissions committee, we then ultimately vote on, are we going to offer admission to the student? Maybe we'll defer the student in early action so we can consider them with the full applicant pool in regular decision. We may vote to deny a student, or we may vote to waitlist a student if there's room after May 1. One thing I always want to stress is that there will always, 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 always be far more academically qualified applicants than there are spaces. There will always be so many more applicants that we wish, if only we had more room to admit this student. I bring that up because I'm not going to diminish how stressful this application season can be. How there's an idea of like, but who's going to pick me? Who's going to select me? Will Yale choose to admit me? And something that I always like to leave students and families with is this idea of, a lot of times we focus on that final part of the application, or that middle part of the application, who's going to pick me. But there are actually 3 parts of the application cycle, and you have direct control over 2 of the 3 parts. So the first part, you have direct control over where you ultimately decide to apply to college, right? You may finish your experience with Multicultural Open House and say, you know what? Mo is delightful. More is delightful. Hey, thanks. But maybe I'm not going to apply to Yale. Maybe after my exploration, I've decided I want something smaller or different place, and that's fine. That's within your purview. Again, it's about finding that great academic, social, and financial fit as you're doing your research. But you ultimately decide what schools go on your list, right? So you have direct control over that. The middle part of the application cycle, the application review, you don't have direct control. You're not going to sit next to me during application review and say, no, more, reread that second part. That's my killer line. Like, I worked a week on that, right? But you can prepare. You can prepare in terms of thinking thoughtfully about, well, what do I want to share with Yale or any school I'm applying to? What am I making sure my recommendations are from people that can truly advocate for me? Did I give them the information they need? So no, you can't control what happens in the committee room, but you can prepare. The final part of the application cycle, again, you have direct control over it, because come whether it's December or March or April, you will have a range of schools that say, pick me, pick me, pick me. Like Yale might be one of those schools, right? And suddenly the ball's completely in your court, because you get to decide which school do you say, hey, I choose you. So you have direct control over where you apply. The middle part, maybe not direct control over, but you can prepare. And the final part, where you and your family get to decide, hey, this is where I see myself spending my next 4 years thriving. Focus on the parts that you can truly control. Prepare for that middle part. And this time next year, seniors, you will be in the middle of your first year at wherever your new home is. So get excited about that. Juniors, as much as possible, just keep on thriving, right? This is a difficult year. Junior year is traditionally a difficult year, and this is even more difficult than normal. Make sure that you are doing what you need to do to continue to do well in your academic courses. But make sure during the spring of your junior year, you're starting to see what might the requirements be for any school on my list, because it may change. You think about how different the world was 7 months ago, who knows what it will look like in 7 months. So even if you're watching this video in 2021, make sure you're updating yourself to see, well, what are the requirements going to be? So at this point, I'd like to invite Scott to come back and join me on the video. Hi, Scott. And we're going to start answering some of the many questions that we are seeing here. And, okay, let's start with, would you recommend for students to apply to Yale using the QuestBridge's National College Match or using QuestBridge's application to apply via single choice early action? Well, many of you, this may be a question that's on many of your minds right now because the college match deadline or the QuestBridge application deadline was a couple of weeks ago. The college match deadline is coming up when you have to pick which of your 12 schools. This is a personal choice for students because it's not that you can only be admitted to Yale using the match. And the first things first, you want to make sure that you're a QuestBridge finalist, right? But for our QuestBridge finalists, they will then get an email saying, hey, we heard you're a finalist. Here are your options, because you may decide to, yes, apply to Yale using the QuestBridge application for the match. You may decide, you know what? I'm going to use my QuestBridge application, but I'm going to apply regular decision. That's no problem. You may decide that, that's great that I'm a finalist, but I'm actually going to use the common application to apply early action. Just keep in mind that you wouldn't be able to pursue the match for some schools, but still apply to Yale early action because that's like two private early options. But it's entirely up to you as a student, which application works best for me. We don't have a preference for one or the other. It's not a matter of I have to use the QuestBridge application to have need 100% met, because we meet 100% of demonstrated need, regardless of citizenship status, regardless of whether you're a QuestBridge match or not, or common application or coalition application. That does not concern us at all. Let's see. Another question. I saw one like, does psychology count as a core academic? Does philosophy count as a core academic? Check with your school, but we will see absolutely philosophy sometimes is an English course. Psychology can be a social science course. So we are happy to accept those applications.
Maura, I saw one in here about a non-custodial parent that I might want to...
please answer that one. Absolutely.
Yes. So part of the Css Profile application is collecting information about a family's custodial and non-custodial parent. So the custodial parent is the parent or parents that you live with more than 50% of the time. If your natural parents are separated or divorced, then the non-custodial parent is the other parent. And in most cases, we are going to require information from both custodial and non-custodial so we can look at your family support. However, we do know that there are cases and times where collecting information from a non-custodial parent isn't really possible, and or it really isn't relevant when we're looking at your family situation. So these would be cases like, if there's been an abusive past, if there's been long-term abandonment, those sorts of situations where we maybe need to know a little bit more. So what I would say is, if you have a non-custodial parent and you're concerned about that, be in touch with our office. We have a waiver request form. It's only required one time over your Yale career. And you can provide additional information, and you can submit documentation from a third party. That might unfortunately be a police report, or it could be a letter from a counselor, a school teacher, a clergy member, somebody who knows you and your family well and can speak to your situation. So we want to make sure that it doesn't become a barrier to your admission, but also don't ignore the requirement.
Thank you, Scott. If we're applying through QuestBridge and decide to go test optional, but our guidance counselor submitted our scores in their report, can we ask to make adjustments to our QuestBridge application? Great question. So just so you know, with QuestBridge, the QuestBridge application testing pages are going to be separated from the rest of the application. And if a student is a finalist, one of the first things they're going to receive from Yale is a quick form that's going to ask, do you want us to consider your scores? Yes or no. If a student says yes, then we'll get the scores. If a student says no, then we're not going to use the scores. Even if your counselor submitted it, don't worry. We have to essentially get it from the QuestBridge folks. Another question. I plan to apply single choice early action. Should I also make it clear in my essay that if I was accepted to Yale, I absolutely would attend? I mean, if you want, but that's not going to affect how we review your application. This question is wonderful because it brings up a really good point. We do not track demonstrated interest at Yale. So it doesn't matter, whether you came to Mo or not, or you did some info sessions. You don't need to call 9 times to make sure we know that you are interested in Yale. You applied to Yale, so you're interested in Yale. But I don't want you to feel like, well, I have to send, and this varies from school to school. These are great questions, and questions that we're going to answer here, but make sure you're asking any schools on your list, well, how do you regard demonstrated interest, or how do you regard the college match? But you don't need to put in your application, if I come to Yale, I'm definitely coming, because again, this is about a great academic, social, and financial fit for you and your families. You want to make sure that if you have a couple of options come March, that you're comparing financial aid packages, that you're talking to financial aid offices if you have any questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Scott for a financial aid question after, but make sure you're getting the information you need. Sometimes students and families, they're afraid to ask, like, well, if we don't understand something, no, that's why our offices, we have Zoom appointments. In financial aid, we have our phones are back on, even though we're working remotely. There are lots of ways to email and get in touch with us, but you want to make sure you have all the information you need to make the decisions that you need to. Now, one last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Scott. I do want to make clear, for this year, there is a slight change to the Questbridge College match. We are now one of the binding match schools for the Questbridge College match. So if a student does rank Yale and ends up matching with Yale, then a student is coming to Yale. And don't worry about like comparing financial aid packages, because what's going to happen? We're meeting 100% of our demonstrated need, no matter what. But just know that the Questbridge match is binding this year. Scott, another financial aid question?
Absolutely. So there's another question that we need to touch on that I think many students or families may have out there, and that would be the question came in and said, do undocumented students need to submit a FAFSA or a CSS report? And this is a great question. We get it a lot. And undocumented students, or regardless of your DACA status, are not generally able to file the FAFSA. Because again, remember, the FAFSA is that free application for federal student aid. So it's only required for students that have eligibility for federal aid. However, at Yale, as Maura has said plenty of times, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to meet 100% of need for every student who is admitted. And that goes towards undocumented students, DACA or not DACA. And so you would file the Css Profile and give us the financial documents that you and your family have. If that's filing a US tax return, great. If it's not filing a US tax return, but you file in another country, fine. If it is, I just have income documents showing how I support myself and my family, fine. Provide that documentation. So for undocumented DACA or not DACA, regardless of your status, we're really looking at the Css Profile. That is the most important form for us. And then, be in touch with our office and we can help you through that process, because there's no real place that you've identified yourself, at least on the admission side, as being undocumented. So that'll be something that you'll want to reach out and talk to us individually about. Okay.
And, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, there was another FAFSA question I might tack on right here, if that's okay.
Go for it, absolutely.
And it says, if I'm a senior, do I apply for the FAFSA 2021 or 2021-22? And the answer to that is yes. And it can be a little confusing right now, because when you go out to the federal form, or if you go out to the Css Profile, you may see applications for both the 2021 year, which is the year we're currently in, and the 21-22. Even I have to stop and think about it, right? So if you are a current senior in high school and you are applying for the class of 25, which would be entry next fall, you are applying with the 21-22 FAFSA. If you do the 2021, you'll just end up doing another one. So unless you really like to do it and want to do multiple ones, just do the 2021-22 FAFSA.
2021, 2022. Whew. Just getting older. We're just getting older. Thank you, Scott. I'm going to try and knock out a couple of these questions very quickly. I'm wondering via QuestBridge, I'm applying via QuestBridge, but I was wondering if Yale has any additional supplemental essays I must submit. Absolutely. If a student is a QuestBridge finalist and we receive their QuestBridge application, make sure you're checking your email after, because the schools that you ranked are going to send you confirmation emails, but also next steps. And one of the next steps for students who use the QuestBridge application, regardless of whether they're a finalist or not, one of the next steps will be, one, letting us know if you want us to use your testing or not. And two, there will be a couple of supplemental questions. And these are the questions that would have been on the common application. Some of them will have been on the common application or the coalition application. So make sure you are following up. We call it the QuestBridge questionnaire. Nikki had a great question. Does considering in the context of your school mean we are being compared against other applicants from our school? Wonderful question. It's not that, and I don't want you giving side eyes to any of your classmates. It's not that we're comparing you in terms of, oh, well, we can only take this student versus that student. We don't have numbers of, well, we take X number from this school, Y number from that school, but we're thinking about what does a strong student look like from here? So we're looking at maybe if we've had past applicants from there. Maybe it's based on what the counselor tells us, like, hey, the student is taking the most rigorous curriculum that we've ever seen, or the most rigorous curriculum for what's available. Sometimes schools may even send us profiles, some information about, well, this is our curriculum, but here are some things you should know about it, that students are limited by how many of this kind of course that they can take. So I don't want you to think of it in terms of, well, me versus this other student, because you're the best you, they're the best them, right? But it's going to be, what are we seeing on that transcript in the school context? And then all those other pieces that come together too, right? So that's another thing. It's not just about who has the highest GPA in the school, but context of your school, all those things like, what does a strong student look like? Maybe even things like, well, how many students from this school go to 2-year colleges or 4-year colleges? Maybe how many students are on free and reduced lunch? What are the resources at this school, right? The disparity in terms of schools across the country, I mean, that's a webinar for another time, but we want to see students who are taking advantage of their resources that are available to them at their respective high schools, right? So I don't want a student to think, well, my school doesn't have all the things that this other school has. Let's see how you're taking advantage of the resources that are available for you. So thanks for that question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. In terms of using Slide Room, what are the options for students to showcase a part of themselves, e.g., that question just, there it is. For example, activism via news interviews rather than a piece of art. Is this type of material accepted through Slide Room? If not, are there alternative routes to take to present this to admissions office? So keep in mind what I said about the required materials, and the overwhelming majority of students who apply and are admitted, they do it with exactly what we ask for, but we will accept supplements, absolutely. So Slide Room can be used to highlight, maybe it's art, maybe it's music, it can be used, we also accept, there are some students who may submit a STEM supplement, they indicate that in their application, then there's a form where they can provide like a research abstract and tell us a little bit about their work in the lab. If a student wants to showcase other parts of themselves, and that doesn't fit into the application essays, and again, there's a lot of writing for you there, so there are ways to talk about it. The applications will have additional information sections where a student is able to share, maybe it's a link, maybe you wouldn't be able just to upload it through the application. Also, the application status portal that students have access to once we receive their application, there are ways to upload supplemental material in that way. So if, let's say, someone wanted to make sure we knew about this news article, they are able to upload that form. But keep in mind, you see us, we're humans, right? And we do all of this reading, and it's not that more is necessarily better. If you're going to submit anything that's supplemental, it should add in a way that we can't find anywhere else on your application, right? So I don't want you to think, well, if I submit more recommendations, that's better. Not necessarily if it's only telling us the same stuff over and over, but the opportunity will be there for you to submit additional info through your application status portal. Scott.
Yeah, so there's really two here that are tied together a little bit that I'd like to take. And the first one is about outside scholarships, because I realize that we haven't touched on that at all. And now is the actual time to start thinking about outside scholarships. So I'm guessing that Neil, either maybe has a sibling or, has some familiarity with outside scholarships. Outside scholarships are money that does not come from the federal government, the state government, or in this case, Yale, right, from the institution. And so those might be the Potter State Bank of Potter, Nebraska, or it might be the Kiwanis Club or other religious organization. And oftentimes these local community-based scholarships have funding that is available to students. It might be $500, it might be $1,000 or $2,500. But what I would say is that these are questions, or these are scholarships that oftentimes the pool is not as large, depending if you're looking at either a school or a county scholarship versus a nationwide scholarship. The pool is not as large, and oftentimes those monies go unspent. There are people who are trying to give money away. And we try and allow at Yale that those funds would benefit the student the most, right? So it does, the first thing that it replaces is any portion of your student share. When we talk about student share, that would be money that we would expect you, the student, to contribute towards your books and personal expenses mostly, right? So that would be maybe through your summer work or through your semester work on campus. And we will allow those outside scholarships to replace that expectation in your financial aid award. So it's extra money that would go into your pocket. So you would have to work less or potentially borrow less if your family decides to borrow. So those are a great source of funding that can, even if it's only for 1 year, but it can help you get to campus and have money for books right away or other items. So there are a lot of ways that outside scholarships can be super helpful. The other one that I just wanted to take a pass at, because there's somebody who asked if I could explain exactly how to apply for financial aid at Yale. It's not a silly question. Do not worry about that. Even though we cover it, it is one of those where, and I've seen a couple in the chat that are asking, well, how do I tie my admissions and my financial aid application together? The good thing about our process is you don't have to do that. You file for your admissions application, just like Maura is talking about. You go through that process. Your financial aid is a completely separate process. We are going to tie the two together behind the scenes once your admission has been decided, right? So that's the important point there. For financial aid, I just go back to a couple of the slides that I shared. The first and most important document for me is going to be that Css Profile. That is the one that is most relevant for Yale, and that is what we base our funding off of. That'll have information for both the custodial and the non-custodial parent, and we've talked about the waiver if non-custodial is appropriate. The second form would be the FAFSA, that free application for federal student aid. That would be the second one. And then there are going to be some Yale-specific forms, but you don't actually have to write and tell us, hey, I'm going to apply for aid. If you've submitted an admissions application and you submit a Css profile, look, we're going to put 2 and 2 together and we're going to assume that you're applying for aid, right? So there's no additional application, if you will, that is necessary for Yale. There are some other required documents, and this year we're working to bring a portal up live so you'll be able to check those documents through your admissions portal as well. Okay, so those are the two that I wanted to get in. There is a question about due dates for those, and I'm going to refer everybody to our website because those will be coming up. It depends on whether you're QuestBridge, whether you're early action, or whether or not you're regular decision. Okay, so Maura, I don't know if you have.
Yep, I have. I think maybe Scott and I will each answer one more question, and then I'll make sure you have contact information, and we'll give you some final parting words. But the last question I'll answer, because this has already come up a few times. Oh gosh, what happens if a non-core academic subject teacher already submitted my letter? Maybe it was a non-core academic. Maybe your principal just loves you to death and wants to submit a letter on your behalf. That's not a problem. That person can either email it to us. We even have on our admissions website a page for counselors, where counselors or teachers can upload additional material. So the teacher can do it that way. Also, technically, like, someone could still mail it in. I recommend doing it electronically though, because we're mostly working remote at this point, and we just want to make sure we're able to attach it to your file sooner rather than later. But on the admissions website, and as we're wrapping up, I'll make sure I share the slide. On the admissions website, admissions.yale.edu, you're able to, whether it's ask a question there, or you'll see on the admissions website the For Counselors section, and that's where additional materials can get uploaded by a teacher or a counselor. Scott, if you want to answer one last question live and then transition to maybe some parting words or any advice that you have for our families and students that are joining us.
Sure. What an amazing photo, though, I have to say as well, right? So just looking at that makes me long to be on campus again soon. So, you know, I think the one last question that I would take, there seem to be a few out there about non-custodial. So I just want to cover that briefly as well. So remember, the federal form, the Fafsa, free application for federal student aid, does not require information about a non-custodial parent. Yale's form, and schools that, like Yale that use the Css Profile, we do require non-custodial information. So when we're calculating, there's a question about how the income of non-custodial parent is calculated. We do a separate calculation for your one custodial parent, your one non-custodial parent, even if they have remarried, right? So even if they have remarried, we will subtract out the spouses, and we will focus on the two biological or natural parents. And in most cases, we look at income and assets for both parents and students, and that would go for custodial and non-custodial, okay? So that's sort of how it works. And I would just again remind folks, if there are questions or concerns about your non-custodial parent and whether or not they should be included in the information, reach out to our office, email, you can set up a Zoom appointment, you can call us live, we're answering phones and we're able to take those questions. And then just in wrapping up, the few words that I would say is, it's been a pleasure to join you today. I can't wait to be able to do this and meet you in person. To me, that is one of the most rewarding parts of our job. But I would say that, you know, finances can be a huge concern, although admissions, you know, the admission process might take sort of that front burner and might be the focus of your spotlight. Don't let finances linger too long in the background. So if there are questions, if there are things that we can answer for you, now is the time to ask those as well. Remember, you can go out to the website, use a couple different calculators. You can get an estimate, either a more precise one or a range. And we would love to carry on this conversation about financing, because I know for many families, finances and the cost of college are a real concern, especially in this day and age of COVID-19 and all of the other economic challenges that we have. That being said, I really hope that we can answer those financial questions, put your mind at ease, and you can focus on finding the right fit. And I sure hope that's Yale. And if it's not, there are a number of other great institutions out there. Of course, I say, you know, I might be a little biased right now towards Yale, but, you know, make the college process about finding your fit. And as you're going through it, just ensure that, you know, affordability is one of the pieces. It's not the overriding factor. And we are here to help you with that. And with that, I just want to wish you the best of luck in your college search. And you're in great hands with Maura and the rest of the admissions team, and let us know how we can help.
To wrap things up, I again would like to thank Scott for being here to talk about undergraduate financial aid. They're such wonderful colleagues, and we're so thrilled to have them just a couple of blocks away from our office. I also want to thank Jill, Marisa, Catherine, and Denasia on the back end for answering a lot of your questions while we were also answering live. And also Megan and the Yale conferences and events. They've been supporting us throughout these 2 weeks of programming. This is, some of you may not realize this, but this is the first ever virtual multicultural open house that we've ever had. And I'm just so thankful and excited that so many of you were able to Zoom in from across the country and around the world. So Scott offered really incredible advice, reminding you about thinking about this academic, social, and financial fit and making sure that finances are a piece of it. And there are going to be a lot of schools, it may be Yale, it may be someplace else. But my hope is that whether it was watching some of our cultural center panels or watching the research panel or hearing more about Yale from our current students, that you've been able to get a sense, a little bit of a sense of what the Yale communities are like. But also, hopefully this experience generated some questions for you to keep asking us and remain in touch. You will get in your email a follow-up message as well as a survey, and we'd love to hear from you, but remain in touch. Keep watching the videos, keep digging into the different websites and get your questions answered. My final piece of advice is an acknowledgement of the time we are all living through right now. Right now, you might be a sophomore or a junior or a senior. You may be a parent or a caregiver or a guardian who is thinking about the well-being of your students. And from global health crises to everything that is going on in this country and around this world, I cannot stress this enough as an admissions officer. Your number one priority has to be your well-being. It has to be your health and safety. If you're going to school remotely or even in person, make sure that if something's going awry, like maybe your Wi-Fi isn't as reliable or something's going on, that you're remaining in touch with your school, with your counselors, with your teachers, and that you're asking for the help and getting the help you need. Because yes, the application process can be fraught, but more than ever, please hear this, that it is so important for you to prioritize yourself, your health, your safety, your well-being. That's the most important thing, the well-being of your family. So be in touch. We're so thankful that you were able to join us on this Saturday afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you're Zooming in from. And we hope to hear from you soon, but we really appreciate you spending some time with us. So with that, I bid you all farewell. Thank you for coming and making this first ever virtual multicultural open house such a success and such a fun experience. And we hope to hear from you soon and hope to get to meet you in your applications. Take care, everyone. Be well. Bye.